Matt Anderson from Viewfinder Center here. Dagmar's behind the camera. We're coming to you from Namutoni Campground on Etosha Pan in Namibia with a few quick tips on how to prepare for a trip to Africa. I'll get right into it talking about camera gear first, and then I'll talk about a few of the personal sundries and clothing items that we've brought on our trip this year. Before I get into it, I'll just mention that these countries, Botswana, Zimbabwe, and Namibia, these are the three that we traveled to this year. They're very different from each other. The nature of your trip is going to dictate obviously which lenses and which clothing items are more relevant for you. But having done these three countries this year, and this being our third trip down to Africa, I feel like we've gone through our gear pretty well and gotten pretty dialed in on the cameras and the clothing. What I'll do here is I'll first just mention my sunglasses. I've got a nice pair of polarized sunglasses that wrap around and give me nice coverage against the sun. It's very bright out here. The African sun beats down all day long, very hard. And the reason I'm talking about these sunglasses first is so that I can put them on and leave them on. It's so much more comfortable. So yes, let me jump into the camera gear. There are a couple items in my bag that I found particularly useful, regardless of whether you're a Canon person, a Nikon person, a Sony person, Olympus. The first thing to mention is my assortment of polarizing filters that I brought with me. I have got circular polarizing filters for each of the lenses that I've been using mostly. I guess I don't have polarizers for every lens. I don't have them for my fisheye lens, but each of the lenses which I used more regularly on the trip has its own polarizer. Unfortunately, one size does not fit all, so you'll have to shop around and make sure that your polarizing filters are designed to fit on the front of all your different lenses for the trip. I like carrying these in a nice little filter wallet that I can stuff into a pocket or the side pouch of my backpack. Just keeps them from getting scratched up, keeps them from getting dusty. So that was very useful. The other thing is that you will probably find yourself shooting a lot more photos than you ordinarily would, and therefore I would recommend bringing a lot of memory cards with you. And I would shop around if you're upgrading your camera or upgrading your memory cards rather. Think about getting the bigger sized memory cards, at least the 32 gigabyte and perhaps the 64 or the 128 gigabyte, especially if you have a recent camera that produces really big file sizes. I like carrying those in a little wallet too, make sure that I have all 6 of my cards in there and that nothing's gotten lost in pockets and pouches and so forth. So moving from there into a little bit of the more technical stuff, I have on the table here a pair of binoculars. And you may not ordinarily pack binoculars with you on a photographic trip, but I think this is a special type of trip where binoculars can play a really important role. Of course, binoculars range from the super expensive, super high performance all the way down to something that can literally fit in your front pocket. I go for the 10 by 42 dimension or 10 by 42 designation, if you will, binoculars. That means that they have 10 power. In other words, you're viewing something 10 times bigger than what you see with your naked eye. And the 42 millimeter refers to the objective lens at the front of the binocular, meaning that it opens up 42 millimeters wide, gathering in quite a lot of light, which means that when you're viewing wildlife in the evening, you can actually see more light when looking through your binoculars than you can with your naked eye. If you go down from the 42 millimeter objective lens and you do a 30 millimeter or let's say a 25 millimeter, those will work great in normal daylight conditions, but they will not gather more light than your naked eye does. So they'll be a little bit more difficult to use during the evening hours and nighttime. Amazingly, you can use binoculars at night, especially if your safari guide is shining a spotting light on your subject. Okay, moving from there into another non-camera item, but related to charging all of your different electric accessories. I've got a little pouch here. It's got all my different cords and chargers and adapters and things in it, and I like that. It helps me keep organized. In there, I've got a power strip allowing me to plug multiple things in at once. Oftentimes in tents, especially at the safari camps or more remote spots, you may only have one charging point available. So being able to plug 4 things in at a time, very, very useful. And then of course I've got my you know, computer charging brick and cable, mobile phone, not that it was very useful in Africa. I've got 2 different adapters for plugging into the wall. These are what join the power strip to the wall. So I've got the, I guess this is sort of an old British / Indian power adapter. It's the really, really big plug sizes. I don't know how to describe this thing to you. It's the type of thing that you're gonna have a hard time finding in Europe or North America. You're best picking one of these up actually at the airport in Johannesburg or whatever airport, whatever major hub you're transferring through. Keep your eye peeled for one of those. And then I've got the other kind of British style 3-prong adapter. These are the more kind of squared off rectangular pegs. And between those two, I think this was more common in Botswana and Zimbabwe. And this I used pretty much all the time in Namibia. So those travel with me to Africa. And then of course I've got my battery charger for my camera, and that's a piece of my cell phone charger. And then I actually carry one of these little cigarette lighter USB plugs just for charging mobile phones and so forth. I haven't actually needed this too much on the trip because the trucks that we've been in have had a USB charger, but anyway, it doesn't weigh much, so I throw it in there. All this stuff lives in a nice little organizer pouch. And if I move on from there, let's see, I talked about the binoculars. Before I get into lenses, I've got with me a little cleaning kit. In Africa, there's a lot of dust, needless to say. And throughout the course of your trip, changing lenses constantly, you're going to get dust inside your camera and you're going to want to clean it out, especially if you're on a longer trip. So what I carry with me is a blower bulb. I try to use this in a dust-free environment. I may wait until I'm in a clean hotel room before using it. Otherwise, you may end up blowing dust straight into your camera. I carry with me a small magnifying loupe for looking into my camera and checking my sensor to see if there's any dust hanging on. And this one is equipped with a little light so you can actually see really well inside the camera. I find that very useful. And then I have these visible dust sensor swabs. And you just apply a little bit of this sensor cleaning solution to the swabs, and you just take the swab through the sensor. If you've never cleaned your sensor before, you're going to want to study up on how that works and consider practicing actually before you go down to Africa. Very useful indeed. And there's a couple other little implements in here that I'm not going to spend too much time talking about. A lens pen, a brush for just brushing a bit of dust or grit off the front of a lens. It's a challenge keeping your gear clean in this dusty environment. And then batteries. Don't forget to bring several extra batteries. Among my 2 cameras here that I'm going to talk about in 1 second, I have 5 batteries with me. And there have been a couple days where I've gone pretty deep into my battery supply. So bring extras of those. Moving into camera gear, I certainly wouldn't recommend somebody go out and spend, you know, thousands on new camera gear before going on an already expensive safari. But perhaps this just helps you understand what I've brought with me, having done a few trips like this before and adapted the gear over these last few years. This year, we decided to go on the lighter side and take with us the Olympus system. And I've got 2 Olympus OMD EM1 Mark II cameras on the table here. And I've got already my 2 most used lenses attached to the camera bodies. So let me just talk briefly about why I think 2 cameras is a great idea on a safari. There are plenty of times when you're in the safari vehicle, the game vehicle, and you're driving along with your guide and you see something, and maybe it's a bird, maybe it's a leopard, who knows what it is. There's just barely enough time to react, focus on your subject, make any fine-tuning exposure adjustments, and fire away. And if you're lucky, you get 1 or 2 or 3 shots of your subject. And therefore, there's no time at all for changing lenses. What 2 camera bodies allows you to do is stay twice as ready for the subject. So this camera's got the 40 to 150 millimeter lens, f2.8 maximum aperture, and this has my 300 millimeter f4 lens. So if the subject's a little further away, of course I'll reach for the longer lens. If the subject is kind of medium far away, I've got the flexibility of the 40 to 150 for dealing with that. I found that tremendously useful, tremendously flexible, and in addition to allowing you to shoot 2 lenses at once, it gives you a little bit of peace of mind that if one camera goes down for some reason, maybe some kind of a fatal problem with the camera, maybe you drop the camera, maybe the camera gets stolen, at least you've got one other option. You've got another camera with you that you can finish the trip with. So I definitely would recommend 2 camera bodies. They don't have to be the same camera. Maybe one of them's an older camera that you've still got on the bookshelf. But don't go to Africa, or don't go on any big trip for that matter, with just 1 camera body. It's a little too risky in my opinion. I did bring with me a flash on this trip, and I did use it actually. I used it for a couple of candid shots around camp of the guests on our trip. I also used it in a couple cases where the wildlife was extremely backlit, up in a tree with sort of flat light. We had one opportunity to photograph a leopard standing on the branch of a tree, and it just had really kind of mediocre light on it. So I filled in with some flash and got a much peppier exposure. Moving on to a couple of the lenses that I photograph with less frequently than the 2 longer ones. I have a 12 to 40 millimeter mid-range lens here. This one also from Olympus. This would be comparable to something like a 24 to 70 millimeter from Nikon or Canon. Kind of a nice all-around lens. If I was just walking through Victoria Falls, taking some candid shots, I would walk around with this one. I didn't generally use it in the game drive vehicles for photographing wildlife, but it was useful around camp and for various trip documentation shots. I brought with me a 25 millimeter 1.2 lens, which I did find handy again for some candid shots, also for some people shots. We did a visit to a village where we photographed a guy who was running a school there and talked to him about some of the challenges that he has. And this was nice because I was able to photograph in some dimly lit rooms and also take some portraits during that cultural exchange. So I would say if you plan on any kind of cultural stuff, you think you're going to be in a portrait situation, you could consider this. This was probably a lens that I used a few times, and so if I was really close to the weight limit with my luggage, I'd probably leave this one at home and just get by with something else. The other lens that I had a lot of fun with on this trip was the fisheye. This is the 8mm 1.8 fisheye from Olympus, and I mostly just used it for fun photos around camp. Quite compact, lightweight, didn't take up a ton of space, so I decided to go ahead and bring that with me. Last but really not least at all is the teleconverter. This is something that you should definitely consider if you don't already own a teleconverter and you don't know much about them. What a teleconverter does is it multiplies the length of your lens by a certain factor. So this one has a factor of 1.4, which means it multiplies your lens length by 40%. On my longest lens, my 300mm, that turned it into a 420mm lens. And if I put that in terms of Canon or Nikon cameras in 35mm language, we're talking about an 840mm lens. That's some incredible reach, especially for such a compact system here. So consider a teleconverter. They perform better on fixed focal length lenses, but if you do have a high-end zoom, like a 70 to 200 zoom, maybe a 100 to 400 zoom, you have to check and make sure that the teleconverter is in fact compatible with your lens. But consider a 1.4 or a 1.7, Nikon makes a 1.7, or even a 2x teleconverter, which will take your lens and actually double the focal length. A lot of times that wildlife is way far away, and you do need some really long reach to get a reasonable shot. Otherwise your animal is just a little fleck in one corner of your frame. So that pretty much does it for all of my camera stuff. And then just a couple quick things to bring up. You will probably be taking so many pictures that you will need some kind of external storage. I have a laptop packed away in my luggage here. And every night at the safari camps, I was downloading my photos to my external hard drive. There are, of course, many different variations of this, and next year I will bring a smaller, more lightweight SSD version of this, but it'll still have enough capacity for all those photos. Okay, I won't spend too much time talking about clothing or accessories, but a few of the things which you don't want to forget on a trip to Africa. Bring with some very strong sunscreen, especially if you're fair-skinned, even if you're in a truck and you mostly have shade around you, you know, cover on the truck, or maybe you're wearing a hat, you will find that the sun just catches up with you, especially after, you know, 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 days out in the bush. So this is a real strong 50 SPF sun cream. A Swiss Army knife or a Leatherman tool, always handy around campgrounds, and a flashlight. I actually have 2 flashlights on this trip. I have a headlamp, which is really nice when you're setting up with tents or doing anything with your hands in the dark. And then I also have a very powerful flashlight that I can use to throw a longer beam of light out there and try to see any animals that might be lurking in the bushes on my way back to the tent. Trying not to scare you with that, but it is a reality. You will be out in a place where there may be large toothy creatures just around the corner. So a nice powerful flashlight is great. As funny as they are, the good old safari hat does a great job of keeping the sun off of your face, off of your ears, off of your neck. And I'm wearing my safari shirt right now. This is the sort of stuff that makes you feel like Indiana Jones when you're trying it on at the outdoor shop and you feel a little bit ridiculous back at home. But when you get down to Africa, you find that everybody's wearing stuff like this because it just makes good sense. The benefit of one of these shirts is that you can roll the sleeves down early in the morning when it's cooler. Also in the middle of the day, sometimes you want to just put them down so that you can keep the sun off your arms. It's not always hot in Africa. Sometimes it's really bright, but it can be windy and a little bit on the cool side. So this allows you some adjustability with regard to that, and lots of pockets where you can keep different things like your lens cleaning cloths. I'd bring plenty of these on the trip, by the way. I stuff them into pretty much all of my pockets and they just stay in there. So no matter what I'm wearing, I can just whip one out and clean off a lens. This trip I had 2 of these shirts with me. I probably will bring 3 of these next time, especially if you're in places where laundry services may be a little bit fewer and further between. So, and then of course a couple t-shirts. I got by with 2 pairs of pants, light colored khaki pants. These are quick drying and they never got too warm because they reflect all the light right back off of you. And then in the morning, you're definitely going to need some kind of sweater, jumper, pullover type thing. This is kind of a puffy insulated layer that I found great for those early morning and late evening game drives. And what to bring it all in. How do you pack this stuff? I put all of my camera gear, binoculars, chargers, everything that I would not be able to buy in Africa, and anything that was precious or let's say mission critical for me. I put all of that in my camera backpack. This one happens to be right at the limit of what you're allowed to carry on in Africa. And there was one moment when we got on a flight from Victoria Falls to Windhoek, and I got the stink eye from the woman at the gate. She saw the backpack. She said, "That thing looks pretty big. I don't think you're going to be able to get it in the overhead bin." I said, "Trust me, I've been on a lot of airplanes, big and small, with this thing, and I can cram it in anywhere." She was kind enough to kind of turn the eye the other way and let me onto the airplane. But in the worst case scenario, I can actually remove the internal camera compartment from this and bring that on the airplane and actually check this in the hold. So that's sort of my backup plan. I'm able to get it all in there. Plus I actually travel with, on the airplane, at least one more shirt, a couple pairs of socks, a couple pairs of underwear, sort of some essential things that would get me by just in case my checked item never showed up. One thing I would recommend doing before getting on your flight down to Africa is consider what might happen if your checked luggage never arrives. This year we had no problems, but on our previous trip to Africa, my checked luggage, Dagmar, my wife's checked luggage, did not arrive until day 10 of our trip, basically the last day. So fortunately we had each thrown an extra pair of socks, underwear, a t-shirt, our hat, sunglasses, everything like that. We'd thrown into our carry-on bag. So we had just what we needed to survive the trip. Don't walk onto your flight in Europe or America or Canada or Australia, wherever you are, thinking that your checked luggage is definitely going to arrive at your destination, because we've talked to plenty of people who have had issues with their luggage. You really don't need that much clothing on these trips. I mean, that's the heaviest clothing item that I have with me. But The soft luggage, duffel bag type like this one, will allow you to fly on small internal flights without getting any kind of stink eye from the pilot. The pilots really do not tolerate hard-sided luggage, like the wheeled type of luggage that's so convenient and nice to carry on all those other flights. When they see those wheels on your bag and when they see that retractable handle on your suitcase, they're going to shake their finger at you and they're going to insist that you buy one of their soft duffel bags, and they're going to have you repack all of your items in that soft duffel bag, and you're going to have to wave goodbye to your suitcase at some little airport. So bring a soft duffel bag if you plan to do any flying in Africa on small airplanes. We were on Cessna Caravans. I think they were all Cessna Caravans, and the luggage compartments on those are small, and they need that soft duffel bag so that they can kind of cram things in and use the space in the hold as effectively as possible. So yeah, that's pretty much it. The only other things I have laying around here are my little sort of poochie pack, fanny pack thing with my travel documents, passport, wallet, hotel room keys, etc. go in there. And I've got a little notebook in front of me here, which I use when I'm talking to people and getting tips and information. And so that does it for all of my camera gear. And I wish you safe travels wherever you're headed. Have a great time, shoot lots of photos, and enjoy your once-in-a-lifetime travel experience.